We tend to think of death as this single moment, like a switch being flipped from on to off. But science tells us a completely different story. It's not a moment at all, it's a process, a fascinating, complex process. And even after we're gone, parts of our body keep on working, just for a little while. So let's dive into this and explore exactly what happens in those critical first 24 hours after we die.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start by defining what death actually is, from a medical standpoint. Then we're going to walk through the first hour, what happens when the body starts to stiffen, and then we'll get into the great decomposition. After that, we'll peek beyond the first day and wrap up with a really incredible idea, the ecosystem of you.
Okay, so first things first. Before we can start the clock on what happens after you die, we've got to agree on what it means to actually be dead. And trust me, scientifically, it's not as black and white as you might think.
Really, you have to think about two different kinds of death. First up is clinical death. That's the moment your heart stops beating and blood flow ceases. Now, right at this point, there's a very, very small window where you could potentially be resuscitated. But if a few minutes go by without oxygen getting to the brain, you enter biological death. And that's when the brain cells and organs are damaged beyond repair. At that point, it's irreversible. There's no coming back.
But here's where it gets kind of weird. Even after someone is officially biologically dead, the body doesn't just power down all at once. It's not like shutting off a computer. For example, your digestive enzymes are still active, and some skin cells can actually keep living for hours. It's a strange thought, isn't it? These tiny little pockets of life are still fighting to hang on, even as the whole system is shutting down. All right, now that we know what we mean by death, let's start the clock. We're about to look at the immediate and really rapid cascade of events that kicks off the very second the heart stops for good. At minute 0, boom, the engine cuts out, the heart stops, and with it, the flow of oxygen. Now, your brain is incredibly hungry for that oxygen, so it's the first to feel the effects. Consciousness is gone almost instantly. But it takes about 5 to 10 minutes for the brain's neurons to start dying off on a massive scale. By the time we hit the 30-minute mark, you can already start to see the first visible changes on the body. And the very first of these signs is something called pallor mortis. It's just Latin for the paleness of death. And that's exactly what it is. Without the heart pumping blood through all those tiny capillaries near the surface of your skin, that rosy color just fades. The result is this very noticeable kind of waxy paleness that spreads over the body. Right on the heels of the paleness comes discoloration. This one is called livor mortis, or the bruising of death. It's pretty simple, really. Since the circulatory system is off, gravity takes over. All the heavy red blood cells sink down and settle in whatever part of the body is lowest, creating these dark purplish patches. For forensic investigators, this is a huge clue that tells them the time of death and how the body was positioned.
Okay, let's move on to probably the most famous post-mortem phenomenon there is. We've all heard of it, probably from movies and TV shows, but now we're going to get into the fascinating chemistry of why a body becomes, well, as stiff as a board.
Now here's something that might surprise you. We all know our muscles need energy to contract, to tighten up. But what's wild is that they also need energy just to relax. That energy comes from a molecule called ATP. After death, the body stops making ATP. So without that energy source, the little fibers in our muscles get locked into place. They can't release. This process starts in the smallest muscles, think your eyelids and jaw, and then it slowly spreads to the rest of the body. This whole process, rigor mortis, usually kicks in somewhere between 2 and 6 hours after death. And while those major muscle groups are locking up, something else is happening. Because the body has lost all control from the nervous system, the muscles that control the sphincters also relax, which can sometimes lead to the release of any waste left in the body.
So far, we've mostly been talking about the things you can see on the outside, the paleness, the pooled blood, the stiffness. But now, we're going to turn our attention inward, to a process where the body literally begins to break itself down from the inside out.
So, somewhere in that 6 to 12-hour window, rigor mortis is hitting its absolute peak. The entire body is completely rigid. But while that's the big show happening on the outside, a much quieter and honestly a much more powerful process is getting underway on the inside.
This next stage is called autolysis, and this is where things get truly strange. See, inside every single one of our cells, we have these little packets of powerful digestive enzymes. When we're alive, they're kept contained, but after death, the cell walls start to break down and these enzymes are released. And with nothing to regulate them, they just start doing what they do best, digesting. Only now, they're digesting the body's own tissues. Essentially, the body starts to digest itself.
Now, as we slide into the second half of that first 24 hours, the real drivers of decomposition take the stage. Our gut is home to trillions of bacteria, which are normally kept in check by our immune system. Well, with the immune system now offline, that bacterial population just explodes. They start to spread from the intestines out into the rest of the body, having an absolute feast on the decaying tissues and releasing gases as they go, which causes the abdomen to bloat. And it's these same bacteria that produce sulfur compounds, creating that very distinct odor of decomposition.
So, that first 24 hours is an absolute whirlwind of activity. But believe it or not, it's really just the opening act. Let's take a quick peek at what happens next as all these processes continue and even accelerate in the days and weeks that follow.
Yeah, the changes get even more dramatic after that first day. Within 2 or 3 days, that gas buildup can cause some pretty extreme bloating. By the 1-week mark, the layers of skin can actually start to slip and detach. And after about a month, though it really depends on the environment, most of the soft tissues will have been broken down, starting the final journey towards skeletization.
You know, it's really easy to hear all of this and just see a grim story of decay, of destruction. But what if that's only half the picture? What if all this breaking down is actually creating something brand new?
And that brings us to our final section, and maybe the most profound one. We're going to completely reframe this entire process, not as an end, but as the chaotic, vibrant, and absolutely essential beginning of a whole new ecosystem.
So let's just reframe this whole thing. You don't just stop. You don't just disappear. You transform. What was once a single, complex organism becomes the literal foundation for thousands, maybe millions of different forms of life. Scientists actually have a name for this: post-mortem microbiodiversity. It's a way of describing the incredible explosion of life. All the bacteria, the fungi, the insects, and countless other organisms that thrive on the rich nutrients a body provides. It is, quite literally, an entire ecosystem emerging from what was once a single person.
I think this quote just sums it up perfectly. What was once a human being becomes food and shelter and the very catalyst for a brand new food web. Your physical existence absolutely continues, but your role in the story has changed. You're no longer the main character. You've become the stage itself.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. From a purely biological perspective, death isn't a final stop. It's a transfer of energy. It's a handing off of the baton in the great relay race of life. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does it really mean to be part of a cycle that is so much larger and so much older than any one of us?